And welcome back as we continue our coverage of the breaking news, the death of Fidel Castro at age 90.
And Cuba is opening its doors to more and more tourists these days, drawn by its history and a sense of nostalgia. One of those tourists was our own Ron Claiborne. You recently visited the country. What did you see?
Well, I'm actually on assignment, just for the record. But for a long time, the U.S. and Cuba have had a strained relationship. The economic embargo, which is still on, broken off diplomatic relations, refugee crises. But in the last year, that's begun to change, and dramatically. One of those changes, Americans can now travel to Cuba a lot more easily.
It began with last year's restoration of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States. The U.S. Embassy in Havana opened shortly afterward. American tourism in Cuba forever transformed.
The progress that we mark today is yet another demonstration that we don't have to be imprisoned by the past. When something isn't working, we can and will change.
In May of this year, a Carnival cruise liner docked in Havana, the first American cruise ship to arrive in Cuba in decades. And in August, the first direct commercial flight traveling between the two countries since 1962. Americans now flooding the island and filling up hotels with record bookings. On my trip to Cuba this past May, I ran into several American tourists.
Now it's here. The Americans are here, the tourism is here.
An influx of visitors bringing much-needed income to Cuba's tourist industry. A big difference from my first visit 20 years ago.
I first came to Cuba 19 years ago, and at that time, this area, Old Havana, was pretty much in disrepair. I came back a second time, 2 years later, and this area was being restored. And now, 19 years after my first visit to Havana, Old Havana has been pretty much restored to its centuries-old splendor.
When President Obama visited Havana earlier this year, he was the first sitting president to visit Cuba since 1928. Major League Baseball holding a preseason game there last March, the first time since 1999. And that same month, rock legends the Rolling Stones strutting in front of a huge crowd, many of whom used to have to listen to their favorite rock bands behind closed doors.
It's brilliant, it's very historical thing.
That's a lot of change in 1 year for a country once frozen in time for more than half a century and mostly forgotten by American travelers until now.
And just one point that Americans cannot just get on a plane and go there. You need to go as part of a cultural tour. So the tourism, it's picking up, but it's not open. You didn't just fly there.
It almost looks like you're walking into a time capsule.
In many ways, yeah, absolutely.
All right, Ron, thank you so much. We'll be right back, everyone.